The bright streak cut across the night sky, trailing golden fire as it descended. Dr. Kim Tai-ho adjusted his telescope, following the unusual object with growing excitement. Unlike normal meteors, this one moved too slowly, changing direction slightly as if guided by an unseen hand. Not natural, he whispered to himself in the empty observatory, his breath fogging the cool air. Tai-ho had spent 15 years studying the stars at the Mountain Pine Observatory, but never had he seen anything like this. He quickly recorded the object's trajectory and checked the readings on his instruments. The data confirmed his suspicions. Whatever was falling toward Earth was maintaining a controlled descent, bleeding off speed in a way no natural object could. Tai-ho grabbed his phone and called his supervisor, Professor Han. "Something is entering our atmosphere," Tai-ho explained urgently. "It's not burning up, and it's changing direction. I believe it's a craft of some kind." "Are you certain?" Professor Han's voice sounded sleepy but concerned. "Positive. Based on its current path, it will land approximately 30 kilometers north of here, in the forest reserve." After hanging up, Tai-ho hesitated only briefly before making his decision. Protocol demanded he stay at his post and continue observations, but curiosity pulled stronger. He grabbed his jacket, car keys, and a small field kit before rushing out to his old blue truck. The mountain roads were empty as Tai-ho drove toward the calculated landing site. His headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the mist that hung between tall pine trees. The radio crackled with emergency broadcasts. The military had detected the object and was mobilizing to intercept it. "I need to get there first," he muttered, pressing the accelerator harder. As an astronomer, he understood the scientific importance of what was happening. As a human being, he felt drawn to this moment by something deeper than professional interest. 20 minutes later, Tai-ho abandoned his truck at the end of a logging road and continued on foot. The forest was alive with night sounds, but as he hiked deeper, an unnatural silence spread around him. His breath came in quick clouds as he climbed a steep ridge, guided by the coordinates he had calculated. At the top, he stopped suddenly. Below him in a small clearing lay a silver object about the size of a small car. It hadn't crashed but rather settled gently into the earth, leaving only a shallow depression in the soil. Steam or mist rose from its metallic surface, which glowed faintly with blue-white light. Tai-ho crouched behind a fallen tree, his heart racing. In the distance, he could hear helicopter rotors. The military would arrive within minutes. He fumbled for his phone to document what he was seeing, but before he could take a picture, a section of the craft slid open silently. Light spilled from inside, casting long shadows across the clearing. Tai-ho held his breath as a figure emerged and stepped onto Earth soil. The visitor stood upright on two legs and had two arms, remarkably humanoid. But even in the dim light, Tai-ho could see the differences. Her skin had a pale blue tint with subtle patterns that seemed to glow from within. Her movements were too fluid, too graceful for any human. She was dressed in a simple silver-gray bodysuit that matched her craft. The alien stepped away from the pod and looked around, seemingly taking in Earth for the first time. When she tilted her head back to observe the stars, Tai-ho saw her eyes, large and filled with what looked like liquid starlight. The sound of helicopters grew louder. Spotlights swept through the trees at the forest's edge. The alien tensed, clearly aware of the approaching threat. She turned quickly, scanning the perimeter of the clearing. Something made Tai-ho stand up from his hiding place. Perhaps it was scientific curiosity, or some inexplicable connection he felt to this moment in history. Whatever the reason, he found himself stepping into the open, hands raised to show he carried no weapons. The alien's gaze locked onto him immediately. For a frozen moment, they stared at each other across the clearing, human and non-human, separated by perhaps 50 meters and untold light years of evolution. Then something unexpected happened. The alien's face changed, showing an expression Tai-ho recognized instantly despite her otherworldly features. Relief. Military vehicles crashed through the underbrush nearby. A spotlight found the clearing and illuminated the silver craft. Shouts echoed through the trees as soldiers approached from multiple directions. The alien made her decision in that instant. With impossible speed, she raced toward Taiho, moving with such fluid grace that she seemed to float above the ground. As she approached, he could see more details of her face, features that were almost human but refined, perfected. She stalked just meters from him as soldiers burst into the clearing, weapons raised. Time seemed to slow as she reached out one hand toward Taiho, her eyes pleading with unmistakable intelligence. Taiho was stunned, not just by her words but by the fact that she spoke his language at all. Before he could respond, she closed the distance between them and grasped his hand. Her touch sent a strange warmth up his arm. Images flashed through his mind. Stars seen from unfamiliar angles, vast structures orbiting distant suns, faces of beings unlike any Earth creature. "Please," she whispered, "they will destroy everything I bring." The soldiers surrounded them, bright lights blinding Tahoe as commands were shouted. The alien pressed something small and cold into his palm, closing his fingers around it. "My name is Era," she said quickly. "Your world needs what I know." As the military closed in, Tahoe made a split-second decision that would change humanity's future. He stepped in front of Era protectively and called out to the approaching soldiers. "She's seeking asylum. She's intelligent and means no harm." A high-ranking officer pushed forward, his weapon trained on both of them. "Step away from the alien, civilian. That's a direct order." Tahoe didn't move. "I'm Dr. Kim Tahoe from Mountain Pine Observatory. This visitor has critical information. We need to listen to her." Era stood straight beside him, her strange eyes sweeping over the human forces surrounding them. Despite being outnumbered, she showed no fear, only determination. "I chose your world for a reason," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Let me speak with your leaders. Time is shorter than you know." The clearing fell silent except for the whir of helicopter blades overhead. The fate of first contact, and perhaps Earth itself, hung in the balance of the next few moments. Taiho's small cabin sat hidden among tall pine trees, 3 hours from the nearest town. No electricity lines reached this far into the mountains. Solar panels on the roof provided limited power, and a stream behind the house supplied fresh water. It was a perfect hiding place. "We should be safe here for now," Taiho said as he built a fire in the stone fireplace. Night was falling, bringing mountain cold with it. Era stood by the window, her blue-tinged skin glowing faintly in the growing darkness. She hadn't spoken much during their escape. After the military had taken them into custody, confusion among different government agencies had created just enough chaos for Taiho to help her slip away. An old friend working security had looked the other way at just the right moment. "They will find us eventually," Era said, turning from the window. "Your military has technology that can detect my biosignature." Taiho nodded, but not immediately. "We have time for you to explain why you're here." He gestured to a wooden chair. "Please, sit. Are you hungry? Do you eat our food?" Era sat down carefully, studying the simple furniture with interest. "I can process your organic matter, yes. The Stellar Authority designed us to adapt to various environments." "Designed you?" Taiho placed a bowl of rice and vegetables before her. Era picked up the spoon and examined it before taking a small bite. Her eyes widened. "This is pleasant. Thank you." She ate another spoonful before continuing. "My people were engineered long ago to serve as scouts and diplomats. We appear similar to most humanoid species to ease communication." Taiho sat across from her. "You said you were fleeing. From what?" "The Authority controls most inhabited worlds in this arm of the galaxy. They aren't conquerors in the way you might imagine. They'd bring order, technology, protection." Era set down her spoon. "And in exchange, they take whatever they desire." "And Earth is next?" Taiho asked quietly. "Your world has been documented but classified as pre-space flight. This typically means observation only. Her star-filled eyes met his, but that changed recently. Earth has been scheduled for processing within your decade. Processing, resource extraction, population management, cultural harvesting. Era's voice grew softer. I was assigned to complete the preliminary survey of your species. I was supposed to confirm you posed no threat to authority interests. Outside, an owl called in the darkness. The fire crackled in the silence between them. Instead, you defected, Taiho said. Era nodded. My kind were engineered to understand other species, to empathize. Most of my colleagues suppress this capacity when it conflicts with authority directives. I could not. She reached into a hidden pocket in her bodysuit and removed a small crystalline object that glowed with inner light. This contains technological specifications that could help Earth defend itself. Shield designs, communication protocols, weaknesses in authority systems. Taiho stared at the crystal. Why would you betray your people to help us? Because humans are remarkable. Era leaned forward, suddenly animated. You don't realize how special your species is. You adapt faster than any other documented sentient race. Your creativity, your emotional range, your resilience, these are rare qualities in the galaxy. We also fight constant wars and damage our own planet, Taiho pointed out. Yes, you are young as a civilization, but your potential. Era's hand moved to touch his, then stopped. There is a resistance within the authority. Scientists, scholars, diplomats who believe in cooperation rather than exploitation. I am not alone in my views. Later that night, after Era had fallen asleep on his small couch, Taiho sat by the dying fire considering their options. The crystal she had given him sat on the table, casting faint patterns on the ceiling. His training as a scientist told him to be skeptical, to verify her claims before trusting them. But something deeper, something human, made him believe her. 3 days passed in relative peace. Taiho ventured out once to get supplies from a small store 40 kilometers away. No one recognized him, and there was no obvious military presence. During those days, Era shared knowledge that left Taiho breathless. Star maps showing hundreds of inhabited worlds, the principles behind faster-than-light travel, cultural details of a dozen alien civilizations. Your understanding of physics is surprisingly advanced, she told him as they sat outside watching the sunset on the 4th day. You've already theorized concepts that took other species millennia to discover. Yet we still burn fossil fuels and fight over resources, Taiho said. Growing pains. Era's hand finally did touch his, her skin cooler than human temperature but not unpleasantly so. All species struggle before they unite. The moment was broken by a distant sound. Helicopter rotors. Taiho jumped to his feet. They found us. We need to move quickly. They gathered only essential items, the crystal, some food, warm clothes. As they prepared to flee deeper into the mountains, Era suddenly stopped. Wait, listen. Taiho paused. The helicopter sounds were approaching from multiple directions now. They're using a search pattern, Era said. We won't outrun them. Era picked up the spoon and examined it before taking a small bite. Her eyes widened. This is pleasant. Thank you. She ate another spoonful before continuing. My people were engineered long ago to serve as scouts and diplomats. We appear similar to most humanoid species to ease communication. Taiho sat across from her. You said you were fleeing. From what? The authority controls most inhabited worlds in this arm of the galaxy. They aren't conquerors in the way you might imagine. They'd bring order, technology, protection. Era set down her spoon. And in exchange, they take whatever they desire. And Earth is next. Taiho asked quietly. Your world has been documented but classified as pre-spaceflight. This typically means observation only. Her star-filled eyes met his. But that changed recently. Earth has been scheduled for processing within your decade. Processing, resource extraction, population management, cultural harvesting. Era's voice grew softer. I was assigned to complete the preliminary survey of your species. I was supposed to confirm you posed no threat to authority interests. Outside, an owl called in the darkness. The fire crackled in the silence between them. Instead, you defected, Taiho said. Era nodded. My kind were engineered to understand other species, to empathize. Most of my colleagues suppress this capacity when it conflicts with authority directives. I could not. She reached into a hidden pocket in her bodysuit and removed a small crystalline object that glowed with inner light. This contains technological specifications that could help Earth defend itself. Shield designs, communication protocols, weaknesses in authority systems. Tahoe stared at the crystal. Why would you betray your people to help us? Because humans are remarkable. Era leaned forward, suddenly animated. You don't realize how special your species is. You adapt faster than any other documented sentient race. Your creativity, your emotional range, your resilience, these are rare qualities in the galaxy. We also fight constant wars and damage our own planet, Tahoe pointed out. Yes, you are young as a civilization, but your potential. Era's hand moved to touch his, then stopped. There is a resistance within the authority. Scientists, scholars, diplomats who believe in cooperation rather than exploitation. I am not alone in my views. Later that night, after Era had fallen asleep on his small couch, Taiho sat by the dying fire considering their options. The crystal she had given him sat on the table, casting faint patterns on the ceiling. His training as a scientist told him to be skeptical, to verify her claims before trusting them. But something deeper, something human, made him believe her. 3 days passed in relative peace. Tahoe ventured out once to get supplies from a small store 40 kilometers away. No one recognized him, and there was no obvious military presence. During those days, Era shared knowledge that left Tahoe breathless. Star maps showing hundreds of inhabited worlds. The principles behind faster-than-light travel. Cultural details of a dozen alien civilizations. Your understanding of physics is surprisingly advanced, she told him as they sat outside watching the sunset on the 4th day. You've already theorized concepts that took other species millennia to discover. Yet we still burn fossil fuels and fight over resources, Tahoe said. Growing pains. Era's hand finally did touch his, her skin cooler than human temperature but not unpleasantly so. All species struggle before they unite. The moment was broken by a distant sound. Helicopter rotors. Tahoe jumped to his feet. They found us. We need to move quickly. They gathered only essential items. The crystal, some food, warm clothes. As they prepared to flee deeper into the mountains, Era suddenly stopped. Wait. Listen. Tahoe paused. The helicopter sounds were approaching from multiple directions now. They're using a search pattern, Era said. We won't outrun them. After receiving approval, she walked to the table where her possessions had been placed. Items taken from her on the day of her arrival. She selected a small metallic object about the size of a coin. This is a standard energy converter, she explained. A simple tool by authority standards, but it may help you understand what you face. With a flick of her wrist, the device activated. The air above it shimmered, and suddenly a 3-dimensional image appeared, a map of the galaxy with thousands of tiny lights. The blue points are worlds controlled by the Stellar Authority, she said. The red are independent systems. The yellow are scheduled for processing. Earth's location was marked in yellow, along with nearly a dozen other stars in their region of space. Processing, the Chinese premier repeated. Explain precisely what this means. Era's expression grew solemn. The Authority doesn't destroy civilizations. That would be wasteful. Instead, they harvest. She adjusted the device, and the image changed to show a planet being systematically mined. Cities remained intact, but were surrounded by massive extraction facilities. First, They take resources, minerals, metals, biological materials. Then they sample culture, art, music, literature, anything unique. Finally, they assess the population for useful genetic traits or abilities. The room had gone completely still. "And the people?" asked the president of Brazil. "Those with valuable skills are incorporated into authority society. The rest become a labor force." Era's voice remained steady, but Tejo could see the tension in her shoulders. They are not slaves in the traditional sense. They are given food, shelter, basic medical care, but they are not free. The American president leaned forward. "Why tell us this? If this authority is as powerful as you claim, what chance do we have against them?" "Because humans are different," Era replied. She deactivated the projection and turned to face the assembly fully. "Your species adapts faster than any other documented sentient race. Your creativity, your emotional range, your resilience, these qualities are extraordinary." She looked directly at Tejo before continuing. "There is also a resistance movement within the authority. Scientists, scholars, diplomats who believe in cooperation rather than exploitation. I am not alone in my views." "Prove it," demanded the Russian president. "Show us something that validates these claims." Era hesitated, then nodded. "Very well." Without warning, she raised her hand toward a water glass on the podium. The liquid rose from the glass, forming a perfect sphere that floated in midair. With her other hand, she gestured toward the lights overhead, which dimmed and brightened in sequence. Security personnel immediately raised their weapons, but the Secretary General motioned for them to hold. "My species was engineered for diplomatic and scientific missions," Era explained, allowing the water to return to its glass. "We have limited control over electromagnetic fields and some molecular structures. A useful ability, but minor compared to authority military technology." She straightened her posture. "I offer this knowledge freely. I will submit to any test that does not harm me to prove my sincerity." The room erupted in overlapping conversations. Some officials demanded Era be contained immediately as a threat. Others argued for embracing the opportunity she presented. Still others questioned whether any of her claims could be verified. Through it all, Tejo watched Era. She stood calmly, waiting for humans to decide their own fate. Finally, Director Sun approached the microphone. "We have verified some of Era's claims. The crystal she provided contains technological specifications beyond our current understanding but consistent with theoretical physics. Our scientists confirm it's not a fabrication." She paused, looking around the room. "We've also detected unusual energy signatures at the edge of our solar system. Something is watching us, just as she claimed." This announcement sent another wave of tension through the assembly. The Secretary General called for order. "We need to make a decision. Do we trust this visitor?" Tejo couldn't remain silent any longer. He stood up, ignoring his guards' attempts to reseat him. "If I may speak," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I've spent more time with Era than anyone else. I've heard her speak of her home, seen her react to our world. If she meant us harm, she had many opportunities to demonstrate it." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of world leaders directly. "We face two possibilities. Either she's telling the truth, and we need her help to survive what's coming, or she's lying, in which case the technology she's already shared gives us advantages we didn't have before. Either way, cooperation serves us better than fear." A silence followed his words. Then, unexpectedly, the Japanese Prime Minister stood. "Dr. Kim is correct. The scientist's perspective is valuable here. We should approach this as an opportunity for learning rather than a crisis." One by one, other leaders indicated agreement. Not all. Several remained openly skeptical, but enough to shift the mood of the assembly. The Secretary General nodded. "Then we proceed cautiously, but cooperatively. Era will continue to share knowledge under controlled conditions. A multinational team will verify her claims and develop appropriate responses." Era bowed slightly. Thank you for your wisdom. There is much to do and little time to prepare. As the meeting adjourned, Tai-Ho was allowed to approach Era. Under the watchful eyes of security personnel, they spoke quietly. That went better than I expected, he said. Humans continue to surprise me, she replied. Most species would have reacted with pure fear. We're still afraid, Tai-Ho admitted. But curiosity is a powerful counterbalance to fear. Era's eyes seemed to shine brighter. That quality may save your world, Dr. Kim. That, and your remarkable capacity for hope in the face of overwhelming odds. As they were escorted from the room, Tai-Ho realized humanity had just stepped onto a much larger stage, one that spanned the stars themselves. Whether they would find allies or enemies among those stars remained to be seen, but Earth would never be the same again. 2 months passed in a blur of activity. The secure facility had been transformed into the heart of Earth's first interstellar defense program. Scientists from around the world worked day and night, studying the technology Era had shared and developing ways to integrate it with human systems. Tai-Ho wiped sweat from his forehead as he adjusted the calibration on the detection array. The massive dish antenna had been repurposed from a radio telescope to serve as part of an early warning system. Era stood beside him, her slender fingers moving across a control panel with practiced ease. The frequency modulation is still slightly off, she said. We need to account for the gravitational distortion at the edge of your solar system. Tai-Ho nodded and made the adjustment. Being an astronomer had made him valuable to the project, though much of what he now worked with went far beyond his training. Every day brought new concepts that would have seemed like magic just months ago. Better? He asked. Era checked the readings and smiled. Perfect. This will detect any authority ships entering the system from up to 30 light minutes away. That gives us less than half an hour to respond, Tai-Ho pointed out. It's better than nothing. Era's expression grew serious. I expected to have more time to prepare your world. The authority usually moves slowly. Director Sun entered the control room, accompanied by military officers from several countries. The international cooperation that had emerged following Era's revelations was unprecedented. Old enemies now worked side by side, united by a common threat. Today's test was successful, Sun announced. The defense shield generators functioned exactly as specified. We can now protect key cities for up to 6 hours at maximum power. 6 hours won't be enough if a full fleet arrives, Era said quietly. We're working on expanding capacity, Sun replied. The materials you requested for the power cores have been difficult to obtain in the quantities needed. Tai-Ho had grown used to these exchanges, the careful balance between Era's advanced knowledge and humanity's limited resources. What should have taken decades was being compressed into months of frantic work. Later that evening, Tai-Ho found Era alone in the observation dome. The glass ceiling revealed a clear night sky filled with stars. She stood motionless, gazing upward. Looking for home, he asked, joining her? In a way. She pointed to a faint cluster of stars. My birth world is there, though I haven't seen it since I was very young. The authority raises diplomatic scouts in special training facilities. Tai-Ho had learned not to push when Era spoke of her past. These rare glimpses into her life before Earth were precious. The Defense Council approved your recommendation for the orbital platforms, he said, changing the subject. Construction begins next week. Era nodded but remained distracted. Good. The sooner we have eyes beyond your atmosphere, the better. Something in her tone made Tai-Ho uneasy. What aren't you telling me? She turned to face him fully. In the starlight, her blue skin seemed to shimmer with subtle patterns. I've been monitoring space noise with equipment I built from parts in the lab. There are signals I can't fully decipher, but they match authority communication patterns. Tai-Ho felt his heart sink. They're already here. Not in your system yet, but closer than they should be. She hesitated. I fear they know where I went. Before Tai-Ho could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. Red emergency lights flashed as a computerized voice announced, Alert Status 1. All personnel to stations. This is not a drill. They rushed to the control center where chaos had erupted. Technicians shouted reports while military officers barked orders. On the main screen, a blinking red dot moved through a map of the solar system. Detection confirmed, a technician called out. Unknown object approaching from the Kuiper belt, moving at .3 light speed. That's impossible, someone protested. Nothing can decelerate from that speed without burning up. Authority ships can, Era said, her voice cutting through the noise. Everyone turned to look at her. This is a scout vessel. Small crew, primarily automated. They're here to confirm my presence before the main fleet arrives. Director Sun approached, her face grim. How long do we have? At that speed, less than 6 hours before they reach Earth orbit. The control room fell silent as the implications sank in. We're not ready, Sun finally said. The planetary shield is at 30% capacity. The orbital weapons platforms aren't deployed. We have no way to stop them. Era closed her eyes briefly, then spoke with new resolve. There may be a way. If I can communicate with them directly, I might convince them to withdraw. And if you can't? Taiho asked. Then I'll offer myself in exchange for leaving Earth alone, she replied simply. The room erupted in protests. Over the past months, Era had become more than an alien visitor. She was now a valued ally, even a friend to many who worked with her. Absolutely not, Sun declared. We don't sacrifice our own. Era looked surprised. You consider me one of your own. You've risked everything to help us, Taiho said. Of course we do. A new alert sounded. The technician at the scanner looked up with fear in his eyes. The ship has accelerated. New arrival time, 90 minutes. They must have detected our defense preparations, Era said. We've run out of time. What followed was the most intense hour of Taiho's life. As nations around the world were quietly put on high alert, the team at the facility worked frantically to maximize their limited defenses. Era moved between stations, making adjustments and offering advice. Her calm efficiency inspired the humans around her to work faster, think more clearly. Taiho caught her alone for just a moment as she calibrated the communication array. Whatever happens, he said quietly, I'm glad you fell from our sky. Something changed in her expression, a softening that made her seem more human somehow. As am I, Taiho. Your world has given me something I never experienced in the Authority. What's that? A sense of belonging, she replied. A home worth protecting. Before he could respond, the alarms blared again. Contact, shouted the sensor operator. The vessel has entered Earth orbit. On the main screen, a sleek metallic ship appeared, captured by hastily repurposed satellite cameras. It was smaller than Taiho had expected, perhaps twice the size of the International Space Station, but bristling with technology unlike anything humans had built. They're scanning us, Era said, reading data from a terminal. And they found me. She looked up at the assembled humans, her star-filled eyes resolute. It's time to introduce yourselves to the galaxy. The ship broadcast its message to every communication device on Earth, in millions of languages simultaneously, the same cold demand. Return the defector Era to Authority custody. Failure to comply will result in cleansing protocols. You have one planetary rotation to decide. Humanity's first official contact with alien life was an ultimatum. And the clock was ticking. The United Nations Security Council chamber had never been so crowded. World leaders sat shoulder to shoulder, while military commanders and scientists lined the walls. Outside, crowds gathered in cities across the planet, watching the proceedings on giant screens. Humanity faced its greatest test united, for perhaps the first time in history. We have less than 8 hours to respond, the Secretary General announced. The Authority ship maintains orbit and has powered up weapons systems. Our options are limited. Era stood at the center of the chamber, her blue skin almost luminous under the harsh lights. Taiho watched from nearby, admiring her composure despite being the focal point of Earth's most critical decision. If I surrender myself, Era said, "There is no guarantee they will leave Earth in peace. The Authority does not negotiate with lesser species. They would simply take me, then return with a larger force to begin processing your world." "What do you suggest?" asked the American president. "Stand and fight," Era replied simply. "Show them humanity is not a lesser species." Murmurs filled the chamber. Fight an advanced alien civilization with vastly superior technology. It seemed suicidal. The Russian president stood. "With respect, our weapons cannot even reach their ship effectively. Fighting would only provoke them. Not with conventional weapons," Era agreed. "But we've been preparing." Director Sun stepped forward with a tablet displaying technical schematics. "Using Era's knowledge, we've modified 3 nuclear devices with Authority shielding technology. They can penetrate the scout ship's defenses and start an interstellar war." The British Prime Minister objected. "The war is already coming," Era countered. "The only question is whether you face it divided and unprepared, or united and defiant." Silence fell across the chamber as leaders contemplated their options. Finally, the Chinese premier spoke. "Throughout our history, appeasement has never deterred conquerors. It merely delays the inevitable while surrendering the moral high ground." He looked around the room. "I vote to stand with Era." One by one, other leaders voiced agreement. Not all. Several smaller nations argued for negotiation, but enough to form a consensus. Earth would not surrender its friend to save itself. It would fight. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of activity. Military forces worldwide went to high alert. The modified weapons were moved into position. Era and Taiho worked frantically with scientists to maximize the effectiveness of Earth's newly constructed defenses. In a quiet moment between preparations, Taiho found Era staring at a monitor showing the Authority ship. "Are you having second thoughts?" he asked. She turned to him with a sad smile. "I've brought war to your beautiful world." "No," Taiho said firmly. "You brought us warning. You gave us a chance." He hesitated, then added, "You gave us hope." Era's hand found his, her cool fingers intertwining with his warm ones. "Your species continues to surprise me, Taiho. Most would have handed me over immediately to save themselves." "Then most species haven't learned what truly matters," he replied. Their moment was interrupted as Director Sun entered the room. "It's time. The Security Council has voted to reject the Authority's demand." The formal response was broadcast worldwide and into space. The Secretary General's voice was steady as she delivered humanity's answer. "To the representatives of the Stellar Authority, we have received your demand regarding the individual known as Era. After careful consideration, Earth unanimously refuses. Era has requested asylum on our world, and we have granted it. She is under our protection. We invite peaceful dialogue, but will defend our sovereignty and our people, including Era, against any aggression." The response from the Authority ship came within minutes. Not words, but action. The vessel began powering weapons systems that made Earth's nuclear arsenals look like children's toys. "They're targeting major cities," a technician announced, monitoring the sensor data. "Energy buildup suggests firing in approximately 10 minutes. Era moved quickly to a control panel. "Activate the planetary shield now." Engineers rushed to comply. Around the world, massive generators that had been constructed according to Era's specifications hummed to life. An invisible dome of energy began forming in the upper atmosphere, focusing on the areas the Authority ship targeted. "Shield at 60% capacity," someone called out. "It won't hold against a sustained attack." "It doesn't need to," Era replied. "It just needs to surprise them." The Authority fired its first shot, a beam of concentrated energy that struck the shield above Beijing. The impact was visible from space, a ripple of blue-white light spreading across the protective dome. The shield held, but power levels dropped dramatically. 52% remaining, the engineer reported. Second weapon lock detected over New York. Taiho watched as Era closed her eyes in concentration, her fingers dancing across controls. "Now," Taiho. The countermeasures. He relayed the command to military forces worldwide. 3 specialized missiles launched simultaneously from different continents, their trajectories calculated to converge on the Authority ship from multiple angles. On the main screen, they watched as the alien vessel detected the approaching threats. It fired defensive weapons, destroying 2 missiles instantly. But the third, using technology ERA had provided, slipped through the defenses and struck the ship's propulsion system. The explosion was silent in space, but the damage was evident. The Authority vessel listed to one side, its perfect orbit disrupted. Direct hit, someone shouted. Cheers erupted across the control room. ERA didn't celebrate. They'll have secondary systems. This only buys us minutes. True to her prediction, the ship stabilized. But instead of resuming its attack on Earth, it turned its remaining weapons toward a specific location, the facility where ERA and the others worked. They found us, Director Sun said grimly. Everyone evacuate immediately. ERA shook her head. No time. She moved to a specialized communication array she had built weeks earlier. I need to speak to them directly. Before anyone could stop her, she activated the device and began transmitting in a language no human had ever heard, complex tones and rhythms that seemed impossible for human vocal cords to produce. The response came instantly, angry, threatening sounds that made the speakers crackle with energy. What are you telling them? Tahoe asked. That Earth is now under protection of the Resistance, ERA replied between transmissions. That attacking this world will trigger responses from a dozen sympathetic species, that the Authority's monopoly on advanced technology is ending. Are you bluffing? Sun demanded. ERA's strange eyes flashed. Not entirely. The exchange continued for several tense minutes. Then, unexpectedly, the Authority ship powered down its weapons. A new message came through, this time in all Earth languages. Defection status confirmed. Warning delivered. This world is marked for evaluation by full Authority Council rather than immediate processing. Pending assessment. Departure imminent. True to its word, the vessel's engines flared to life. Within moments, it accelerated away from Earth, soon becoming just another pinpoint of light among the stars. The control room erupted in celebration, but ERA remained serious. This isn't over. They'll return with a larger force. But not soon, Tahoe said. You've bought us time. And next time, we'll be better prepared, Director Sun added. 3 months later, ERA stood before the United Nations General Assembly as Earth's first extraterrestrial citizen. The blue passport she held represented more than just her new legal status. It symbolized humanity's decision to stand for principles beyond self-preservation. Today marks the beginning of Earth's emergence onto the galactic stage, she told the assembled delegates, not as servants or subjects, but as equals. The path ahead will not be easy, but together we will show the Authority and all spacefaring civilizations that humanity's greatest strength is not its weapons or technology, but its capacity for courage, compassion, and cooperation. As Tahoe watched from the audience, he felt a profound sense of pride, not just in ERA or in himself, but in his species. When faced with an impossible choice, humanity had chosen to protect rather than abandon, to fight rather than surrender. The stars no longer seemed distant and cold, but filled with both danger and promise. And Earth would face whatever came next united, with newfound friends among the stars.